We're back at the border town castle. When the prince mentions he's heading to the misty forest, Knight Carter, Iron Axe, and the old man Barov are all shocked to hear this. The knight even insists on accompanying the prince as his first knight to protect him, while Iron Axe wants to bring 100 men to keep the prince safe. On the other hand, old man Barov says he has a ton of paperwork to handle. The prince firmly states that this is an order for everyone, and they need to stay and manage the border town while he's away. It seems like Barov isn't fully aware about the devils and the red mist in the most western region, so he curiously asks what's so important about that area that the prince feels the need to go himself. The prince doesn't get into details but says the situation affects the entire western region and could even threaten the destruction of Grey Castle. He claims that he is the only one who can assess it firsthand and insists he must go himself. Knight Carter asks if the prince can spill the exact reason for his visit. The prince says he can't say right now but promises he'll fill them in eventually. He makes it clear that it's a secret mission and everyone needs to keep it to themselves. As everyone's freaking out about the bombshell the prince just dropped, he reflects on the situation in his mind. The Devil Territory is 60 miles from the western region, and these monsters once destroyed the holy city of Tequila, driving survivors to the edge of the continent. It all sounds pretty outlandish, but the prince is glad he's seen plenty of apocalyptic movies. But he knows that people won't easily accept this reality. If word leaks and civilians panic, everyone might rush to leave the western region, and he can't let that happen after coming this far. So, the prince finally sets off with all the witches in their balloon, waving a final goodbye to his loyal companions, who are tearfully watching him depart. Not gonna lie, I'm also super excited to see what they're about to run into in that mist. Meanwhile, as they're floating through the air, Sylvie asks if the church fought the devils 400 years ago, and wonders if that makes the church good. The prince says the church is actually evil, and Nightingale agrees, pointing out that if they were good, they wouldn't have been executing witches for no reason. She explains it would be one thing if the witches were actually evil, but they're not connected to devils at all, plus there's even evidence to disprove that. The prince agrees and adds that first they need to verify if the church really did fight the devils. If they did, why would they hide it and destroy all the evidence? Because they could have gained a lot of followers by spreading the news of their victory. The prince reassures Sylvie that he'll never support the church just because they fought the devils. He's determined to fight against the devils on his own if needed, and he's not afraid because he has witches by his side. Nightingale leans in, happily reminding Sylvie that the church is a bunch of losers who failed to eradicate the devils in the past, so the prince would never side with them. A while later, Lightning points out that they're almost there and can already see the mountain. When everyone in the balloon looks ahead, they're awestruck by the mountain's magnificence. Wendy even notes that these mountains like they just sprang up from the ground out of nowhere. The prince then says they'll set up camp by the mountains closer to the coast, because they'll rest today and start their investigation tomorrow. Once they set up camp near the sea, the prince looks out at the endless expanse of water and thinks it's a good spot, because this wide area makes it easy to spot anything around them, far from the misty forest, and unlikely for animals to come near. The ladies come over and suggest that the prince should sleep inside the tent. That is when Roland remembers that particular day when he tried to sleep among the ladies but had to spend his entire night restlessly. To avoid repeating the same mistake twice, he decides to sleep outside to stay fresh for their morning investigation. Meanwhile, Maggie is also feeling quite happy as she decides to sleep outside as well. The ladies start heading into the tent, and Wendy says she'll swap for Lookout later. As the fire crackles and the prince sits alone, Anna approaches him from behind. The prince asks her if she's not planning to sleep with the others. She replies with no, and says she just wants to stay out here with him. She sits down beside him and mentions that Sylvie should have thanked him earlier for how he comforted her. Then, almost out of nowhere, Anna says she's happy with the choice she made. The prince finds himself confused, and curiously asks what choice she's talking about, but instead of answering, Anna leans in and gives him a quick kiss on the cheek. Afterwards, she doesn't say anything else, just wishes him good night and heads off to sleep. While he still has not recovered from that unexpected kiss, the prince is caught off guard when Nightingale suddenly appears and gives him a smooch on the cheek too. She thanks him for everything he's done for the witches, then vanishes into thin air, leaving the prince smiling to himself. The next morning, the crew is back in the balloon, and they continue their journey to the red mist. Inside the balloon, the prince can be seen still yawning, feeling a bit uncomfortable from sleeping outside. He's already starting to miss the comforts of his castle, especially the running water and showers. Meanwhile, the witches are full of energy and in high spirits, and the prince can't help but marvel at how fresh they look, and wonders if their beauty is part of their magic. Suddenly, Lightning reports that they should be able to see the blood mist from a distance. She quickly points her finger out in that particular direction, and as they peer downward, they spot the entire area swarming with that creepy red mist. Sylvie wastes no time activating her ability, and she quickly reports that they're still too far away from the mist, because she just can't detect anything from this distance. The prince decides to descend further and tells Soraya to make sure she draws every scene from this point onward. As he looks through the binoculars at the coast, he notices there are no piers or docks. Even if there were devils, they haven't built any ships to reach Grey Castle from the sea. Suddenly, Sylvie speaks up, saying that about 10 miles from the coast, in the red mist, there are some structures made of black rock. They're triangular in shape and seem to point upward. Wendy quickly chimes in, noting that these structures sound similar to the mirages they saw in the wastelands, which suggests this place is definitely devil territory. However, Soraya, who's seen devils in their buildings in the wastelands before, points out that the height of these towers seems off. The towers she saw in the mirage were so tall that they should have been visible above the mist, because they were even taller than these mountains. The prince then speculates that what she saw before might have been a devil city, and this could just be a village. While Wendy and Anna are freaking out in the background, the prince keeps his cool and asks what's inside the towers. Sylvie reports that most of them are empty, but some are filled with some kind of liquid. Suddenly she notices creepy red eyes glaring back at her. The prince snaps her out of it, asking urgently what's happening. Sylvie doesn't waste a second before telling the prince they need to get out of there fast, because the devils have already found them. Scratch that, the devils are already on the move. She explains that they were buried underground, with only the pipes on their backs sticking out of the ground. The shit is about to get real, and it's clear they need to get out before things get worse. Sylvie then drops another brutal piece of news, revealing that there are some devils flying, which leaves everyone absolutely boggled out of their minds. The prince quickly orders Wendy to retreat the balloon at full throttle, and our wind girl quickly pushes the balloon forward with her wind powers. But unfortunately, Sylvie reports that 2 devils are rapidly approaching, and they are riding some kind of flying monsters. The prince is blown away to hear this, but instead of feeling terrified, he is kind of curious about these monsters, so he squints his eyes and notices that these devils are apparently riding some hybrid demon beasts. He makes a split-second decision and shouts for everyone to lower the balloon's altitude and reach the ground as soon as possible. He knows that with only lightning capable of flying, it won't be enough to protect everyone if these monsters catch up. If the balloon gets damaged, they're all in serious trouble, and he is kicking himself for underestimating the devils and putting everyone into this risky mess. Before they can even start their descent, the flying monsters close in fast. One of them blocks their path and throws a spear with incredible speed straight at the prince. He braces himself to get screwed, but just in time, Anna conjures a shield to protect him, stopping the javelin inches from hitting him. However, it looks like Anna poured every ounce of her magic energy into creating that shield, and is almost out of juice. While the javelin falls back, the devils don't let up, and they charge at the balloon once again, surrounding the party from both sides. Surprisingly, Anna is still hanging in there, and conjures up the shield once again to keep the monsters at bay. The prince takes this chance, and immediately reminds the ladies that it's finally time to put their bad boys into action. The ladies quickly comply with command, and draw their revolvers right away. They start shooting like there's no tomorrow, with Nightingale even holding 2 revolvers like she's some kind of gunslinger reincarnate. But despite their best efforts, it looks like all those bullets are missing the target, and the monsters are closing in fast. Nightingale then points out that the balloon's shaking too much, which is messing up their aim. Just then, one of the wild beasts roars with its gross, gaping mouth, and Wendy quickly uses her wind powers to fly the balloon away. The abrupt push by Wendy causes the balloon to shake violently, making everyone in the basket lose their balance. Out of nowhere, Anna spots another monster right in front of her. This one grabs a javelin from its back and chucks it straight at her. But Prince Roland, being the hero he is, jumps in front of her and takes the spear right in his shoulder, and the impact shatters his arm in one go, leaving him crashing to the ground. The gruesome sight shatters Nightingale's heart, and for the first time I see her crying. All the witches rush to Prince Roland, and Nightingale calls out to him, but he doesn't respond. It looks like he's gone unconscious after losing a lot of blood. Nightingale sobs uncontrollably, while her tears stream down her face. Without wasting any time, Anna springs into action, quickly starting to burn the stump of the prince's severed arm to stop the bleeding. It seems like she picked up this first aid trick from one of the classes about first aid rescue, and not surprisingly, the bleeding stops right away, leaving Nightingale absolutely shocked. She quickly points out that this is their chance to get back to the border town if they want to save the prince. But this is not going to be that easy as it seems, because these devils are still looming large, and Nightingale realizes they won't make it back to the border town if they can't defeat these monsters. So she makes a split-second decision and tells Lightning to protect the balloon from damage. The girl is startled to hear this for a second as how she is going to stray those devils away, but when she looks at the prince she realizes that they does not have time to be scared, so she quickly flies off into the air, and one of the devils quickly starts chasing her down, while there is still one devil who is trying to poke a hole into the balloon. The monster quickly backs away, and Wendy points out that it must be gearing up for a dive attack. That's when Nightingale steps up, deciding to leap off the balloon to get closer to the devils. Her friends try to talk her out of it, but with the devil charging at the balloon, she doesn't have much choice. Eventually, she jumps from the basket and lands on top of the balloon. She then uses her mist powers, and although she notices there's magic inside the devils, there's no time to dwell on it. She reappears from her mist and lands right on top of the monster's head. With her gun barrel aimed precisely at the monster's skull, she tells it to die and pulls the trigger, and the shot lands a brutal headshot, taking down the monster in one hit. The creature that the devil was riding begins to crash down, and Nightingale also starts to fall along with it. She tries to slip into the mist while plummeting through the air, but without anything to anchor her, the attempt fails miserably. Wendy tries to catch her with her wind powers, but her efforts fall short as well, and Nightingale starts to fear that she might actually die here. As she falls, memories of her past life with the prince flash before her eyes. Her dream of a sweet life alongside him begins to shatter. Despite the terrifying situation, she tears up but also wears a faint, bittersweet smile, and finally admits to herself that she might never be with the prince after all. Well, it turns out that dramatic scene was just a teaser because, let's be real, we all knew Nightingale wasn't going anywhere, especially since Maggie is finally here to save the day. With some serious plot armor at play, Maggie starts evolving right before our eyes, turning into one of those hybrid monsters herself. She quickly snatches Nightingale from mid-air. Because let's face it, no one's writing this series without her. Because she is one of the original witches after all. Maggie then flings Nightingale upward, and she lands safely on Maggie's back. Nightingale finds herself bewildered by Maggie's new hybrid form and asks her what the heck is going on. Maggie responds in a language Nightingale doesn't understand, so she simply tells our demonic bird to head back to the balloon. With that, the newly demonic Maggie starts her ascent towards the balloon. As one of the monsters spots them coming, it quickly grabs a javelin and throws it down with impressive speed. But before the javelin can hit, Maggie quickly transforms back into her little pigeon self. The javelin zooms past harmlessly, and Maggie then reverts to her monstrous form just in time to continue the rescue. As they charge straight at the monster, it's also coming at them full throttle. When they're finally face to face, Nightingale leaps off Maggie's back and dives into her misty world. She reappears right behind the devil's head, presses her gun barrel against it, and blows the monster's head off in one shot. She quickly pops back onto Maggie's back. Even though the devil's dead, its flying monster companion is still very much alive. The beast lets out a terrifying roar, but it's quickly silenced by a bullet that tears through its gaping mouth, leaving a hole in its head. The trigger-happy soldier who took the shot is none other than Sister Lightning, and Nightingale gives her a quick nod of approval for a job well done. Once the threat is neutralized, Nightingale decides it's time to head back. After a while, they finally reach the coast. Everyone gathers inside the balloon basket, worried sick about the prince. You see, traveling by balloon is slow, and even if they fly through the night, they won't reach the border town until noon the next day. With time running short, they decide to let Maggie and Lightning take the prince ahead first. While our sweet little demonic girl is ready to take on the task, Lightning seems a bit anxious. But she soon shakes off all of the disturbing thoughts and confidently assures everyone that they'll get the prince back in time. With that in mind, they strap the prince securely onto Maggie's back. Meanwhile, Nightingale reassures Lightning that the prince getting hurt wasn't their fault, because they weren't born for battle. With that, the two flying girls depart with the prince, leaving the others in the balloon. Anna also suggests they get moving as well, because she's certain those monsters might send another squadron after them, so they need to put as much distance as possible between them and the mountains. They'll set up camp when they find somewhere safe. Soraya is still anxious and worried, trying to figure out how the devils managed to find them. After all, the balloon and basket are camouflaged, so they shouldn't be detectable from 2,000 meters away, even with binoculars. Sylvie then reveals that she had seen a massive devil in the mist, and it was something like a giant black tower. It had a huge head, which was larger than its body, and countless eyes, all of which seemed to be locked onto her. She explains that hundreds of devils surged from underground as soon as they noticed the intruders, and the entire area was swarmed. Anna then adds that the monsters the devils were riding were strange as well. Their blood was blue, which makes it clear that they're completely different from the hybrids they've encountered during the months of demons. Soraya agrees, noting that the creatures they encountered seem more like actual devils. She points out that when Nightingale shot the first devil, it bled blue, confirming they're not just demons. Wendy expresses her relief that if Maggie hadn't transformed and saved Nightingale, they wouldn't have made it out alive. Nightingale adds that while Maggie was transforming, she saw her magic shift from a swirling mass to a pair of pale wings. Meanwhile, Lightning and Maggie are zooming down, both looking pretty exhausted. The little girl then asks if the prince is still hanging on, and Lightning responds that he's getting colder, but thankfully his pulse is still strong. She then tells Maggie to channel all their remaining magic to increase their speed. With a burst of energy, they accelerate to sonic speed. As they fly away, Lightning starts to reflect on the situation. She feels guilty, thinking that if she had left the balloon basket to distract the devils earlier, the prince might not have been injured. She's hard on herself, feeling like she's still a long way from being an outstanding explorer. She's also thinking about requesting a revolver for herself once they're out of this mess, and asking Nightingale to teach her some fighting techniques. Eventually, they reach the border town castle. As soon as they descend down, soldiers rush towards our girl, and Knight Carter is absolutely shocked to learn that Prince Roland is severely injured. Suddenly, the prince wakes up in a frantic state. He glances at his hand and is surprised to find it still there. As he looks around, he realizes he's back at the castle. He calls out for Knight Carter, but then he soon spots some of the witches sleeping down on the ground, and it looks like they must have dozed off while waiting for him to wake up. Quietly, he gets out of bed and peeks outside, and confirms that he really is back at the castle. Anna also wakes up and Roland quickly asks her about everyone. In response, she reassures him that everyone is back in town, and he's the only one who got injured. The prince breathes a sigh of relief upon hearing this, though he's feeling anxious because there is something different about Anna's tone. Out of nowhere, the girl hugs him tightly, calling him an idiot in a strangely affectionate way. Her repeated idiot in such a loving tone leaves the prince's nerves completely frazzled. He then feels a bit warm thinking about how there are people who care for him. He hugs her warmly in response, letting her know he's back and that she doesn't have to be so scared anymore. The other witches also begin to wake up, and they are all amazed to see the prince is out of his unconsciousness. Lightning wastes no time and launches herself at the prince, hugging him tightly, and soon the other little witches join in as well, creating a big, warm group hug. Nightingale is also relieved to see the prince safe and jumps over him like a little kid. The scene is filled with joy and affection, lighting up the entire room. Later that night, the prince sits alone in his room, reflecting on how he seriously underestimated the devils during the expedition. He hadn't anticipated their ability to detect the balloons from such a distance. Though the expedition proved to be quite dangerous, it provided invaluable intel. The devils are no longer just mysterious beings from the underworld, because they have their own civilization and are as culturally developed as humans. The prince probably has scribbled down his thoughts in a letter, which is probably meant for his sister, Princess Tilly. He mentions that the devils seem to have magic, which Nightingale confirmed. However, their magic method is totally different from witches, because they use some sort of external gizmo instead of activating it like witches do. Unfortunately, these are just educated guesses since the devil corpses sank into the sea, so he couldn't examine them closely. Sylvie pointed out that those odd stone towers the devils had might store a red liquid, and the red mist could be the gaseous form of that liquid. The mist's limited range might be why the devils haven't pushed past the Badlands. Based on what they've seen so far, it looks like the devils won't be a big threat to the border town anytime soon. Anna walks into the room, and the prince is a bit startled as she quietly locks the door behind her. He then curiously asks why she's there, and reminds her that he's already healed from his injuries, so there's no need to worry. Anna places her hand over his, making the prince blush like an idiot. She then takes his hand and places it over her chest, making it clear that she can't wait any longer and wants to make the most of their time together before anything else happens. She gets even closer despite her evident embarrassment, and the prince responds with a deep kiss to her lips. After sharing a tender moment,